Rosés from all over the world. We have muted everybody, but if you're welcome to chime in on a question anytime you like, I'm Paul Kalamkaran, your host for the night, with my co-host Ed Marciana.
A loud applause. Thank you.
Yes, I got to get some piped-in applause. Where's my little applause machine? Maybe somebody.
I'm sure you've got it still somewhere without
So,
question.
yeah, we got one fan in here in the store.
Hello.
So, how are you, Ed?
I'm good. I'm very good, actually.
I'm looking forward to tasting these rosés from all over the world. But I don't know if I've told anybody really when it comes to the wine world, except for a couple of preeminent white people with some great stories. But my dad passed about 10, 15 days ago. And as you know, and you express your condolences, but it's an interesting reaction throughout the wine world when I haven't really said anything, but some really fun comments from some pretty old school people in the wine business. Bruce Nyer, Melvin Master, Bartholomew Broadbent, expressing their condolences, and not only that, but sort of recognizing Dad's participation in the growth of wine in America. So I've appreciated that.
Well, good, because it's deserved. It's well deserved. One of my favorite people ever. So, but before you start, I got to tell you a fabulous rosé story that involves your dad.
Go ahead.
Back in '84, your dad was such a sweetheart of a guy. He never turned down salespeople. And I think that because the salespeople were a lot better than they are now. But regardless, this guy comes in and he says, "Oh, we got this pallet of rosé that we lost in the warehouse, and I'd like you to try it out and see if you can use it because we'll sell it all to you at a good price." It turns out to be an 8-year-old rosé from d'Anjou. And your dad goes, "Come on, I mean, really, 8 years old?" And so he calls me and says, let's come over and taste this wine because I've never had anything like it. The wine was out of this world. Absolutely unbelievable. Chateau des Chamans. I'll never forget it. Huh? We tasted the wine. We looked at each other going, "Are you kidding? This wine can't be this good." So he bought it, obviously, and passed it along, and people loved it. I have never seen a bottle since.
Well, that was part of the conversation that we're going to talk about with rosés, because we've been selling them for a long time. And if you remember stocking the shelves at the Palace Freeze Wines and Spirits in 1972, there were a few rosés back in the day, like Matus. Some other things, we'll get to that in a second. But I did want to tell you one thing that Bartholomew Broadbent said. And for somehow history has changed the roles between his father and my father. So Michael Broadbent being the great English wine critic, as well as became known for his wine auctions with Christie's and other organizations. And Dad has a paddle here from the Hublin auction that maybe you knew where it was. There was one in San Francisco. I'm trying to find the actual catalog, but so my dad was there and he bought some lots from the Hublin auction. He bought them from Michael Broadbent. Well, that story has turned into the fact that Bartholomew has broadcasted that my dad was one of the highest bidding guys ever at the Napa Valley wine auction. And I thought that was hilarious because my dad would not have been the highest bidder at any auction, and let alone the Napa Valley wine auction, which produces like hundreds of thousands of dollars of wine sales. Anyway,
that's very funny, actually.
So let's talk about rosé for a second. In the West Coast was sort of slow on the uptick to embrace rosé, and of course it's fully embraced now, but still not like the Europeans or the East Coast of America being so prominent in it. But I want to go back to the days of the wine shop. Matus Rosé. Do you remember that?
Period. The end. That was the end of the sentence right there.
Pretty much it.
That was it. Yeah.
That was all of it. But wasn't Cold Duck Rosé as well?
I don't know.
Yeah, Cold Duck was.
It was actually pretty dark. It was almost red.
It was pink.
Sparkling. Sparkling. Yeah, it was red and sparkling, and it had its moments there for a while, but that was it.
It was $2.49 at the Palace Freeze Wines and Spirits. So
yeah, and it was kind of sweet and nothing.
Kind of sweet. Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the main differences between rosé and in general pink wine. I tell the story about Dad going up to Napa, taking the station wagon. He was on his quest to learn about wine, He had befriended Warren Winiarski at the time, the Barrett family, all this famous stories. But one of them was he stopped at a winery called Sutter Home. This is
Hmm.
1974. And this young man named Bob was working the tasting counter. No one else was in the room. And he says, I've got this wine in the back. I don't know what to do with it. And he brings out what became the famed white Zinfandel from Sutter Home and made them, a fortune in the wine business and still does. But do you know the story about that? Do you know why
Well,
he?
yeah. I mean, I remember the 72 was the first vintage. And your dad called me when the truck arrived so I could go to the store and taste the wine because we were going, what does this wine taste like? What is a white Zinfandel? So he cracks open the bottle. We taste it. One of the driest wines I had in my life. Just absolutely bone dry. We loved it, but it was totally white because they let no skin contact occur on the grape. And that went along for 2 or 3 years. And then I think the third or fourth year, like 76, they had a stuck fermentation and they got like 3 or 4% residual sugar in it. They released the wine anyway because they couldn't afford not to, and they sold it all out in 6 months. So that had now become what they were going to release.
So that's the story that,
Yeah.
depending who you talk to, the stuck fermentation was it stuck fermentation because somebody said the power went out and then everything stopped because the cooling jacket stopped, or because just some bacteria got in there, or there was just the yeast wasn't strong enough to finish the fermentation. But he was making Eye of the Partridge, which was their famed dry rosé, which is fascinating to me that they even had one in 1972.
Yeah, no, El de Pardri was actually a very good wine and a good seller. I mean, your dad did very well with that wine. First of all, it was very unique. It was very, very different. Here's a white wine made from red grapes. People didn't realize that the juice of the red wines is white. It's a skin contact that gives them the color. So, and it had a little blush to it. It was very, very cool.
So let's talk about that. There was always an idea that rosé was a blend of red wine and white wine, which I think it still could be. But in general, the classy, properly made rosé is basically a red grape that's been fermented, been crushed, and the contact with the skin has been minimized to whatever level the winemaker wants to dry the
Mm-hmm.
wine out and or create color.
Right, exactly. Now, some people cheat and they add white wine to red wine and you get rosé, but the proper guys, just use the red wine, the red grapes, and then give it a little blush of color with literally hours of skin contact. So but
Well, not the winemaker's preference to what kind of profile they're going to get out of the wine, what kind of fruit they're going to get out of the wine, how dry it's going to be, the expression of the terroir. Because I think rosés can be very expressive of where they're grown if they're properly made, not just a pink wine that is for summertime. Because I think it's got a lot more elegance than that.
well, these wines certainly prove that. I mean, these are all really great rosés, and they're all so different. I mean, the flavor profiles of these wines are amazing. I'm tasting them back and forth. I'm going, these wines are totally different, yet they're all rosés.
What order do you have them in?
Good question.
I have
I
the
you know I changed my order about 8 times, so that'll tell you something.
I have the Ile de Bouteille, which is Corsica. Then I have the Chateau Saint Pierre, the Dancing Crow, which I just think is fascinating wine
That
from
was great. That was really good.
Navarra. Which I when I looked at the label, I forgot how cool this wine was. And it's Garnacha, which is the Grenache grape in Spain, making it. But that's the thing. That's the point of this, and one of the reasons we kind of mix it up is to show our listeners and our viewers that rosé now is becoming very popular throughout the world, and each wine growing district is making its own sort of style, and you're getting some amazing character from some of these things.
Absolutely. I mean, it's so much fun to taste these wines because, like I said, they're all labeled rosé, and yet they're so different. The only thing that was driving me nuts is that the Corsican wine, I couldn't find the word Corsica on the label.
It's not, yeah. It doesn't say that. Il
It
Boudu,
says,
it's a nickname.
in one point type, there's Corsa, Corsa, period, the end. But I had to go read the article to see what it was.
But Ile de Bouteille, which is the first one, this is the wine I'm looking at here. Ile de Bouteille is the nickname of Corsica.
Right.
And they use rather indigenous grapes of Corsica, which is to me is absolutely fascinating. That a little island off the coast of France or the coast of Italy has its own grapes, and this is a Sciattarella.
Yeah, but
Edrin?
first of all, Sciaccacarello, or however you pronounce it, means crunchy in Corsican.
Oh,
I
I
looked, I,
know you
I
spoke
looked it up,
Corsican.
and it's actually a synonym for Mamolo, which is one of the red grapes that was in Chianti for centuries.
I remember that.
And when I looked it up, I was shocked. And
But there's
and yet
also
in Mamolo is a very dark red grape, but I guess they use it, to make a rosé.
well, this is from Jeff Wellborn, and for the
Mm-hmm.
listeners, this is a very well-known importer of rosés. I love doing business with them because they're always unique. They always have character. They've always expressive of where they're from. This is not quite 12% alcohol, so that keeps it on the lower side, the refreshing side. But
Mm-hmm.
Corsica is that the birthplace of Napoleon as well. I think it is.
No, it's where he ended up
Where we
being.
ended up, that's where. Well, something happened to the guy over there. I don't know what it was, but all right, let's pour this because it's got a wonderful copper color. It's a 2020. That's the other thing that's important to know. Rosés have life if they're properly made. They're good for a couple of years at least, and even longer. Like you said, the D'Anjou was five
Oh,
or
that
six.
was unbelievable. I mean, that was unbelievable. This wine has got the beauty about this wine is this grape grown here because of the soil has can have tremendously high acid, and this wine has high acid, but it's also got fruit to balance it, and so the impression is perfect balance.
Oh,
And I love the
did you
nose.
say the beauty of this wine because it's Ile de Bouteille? Is that's very clever of you, Ed? So,
Very clever of me. What?
by the way, your bell room hasn't changed since you started doing the show months ago.
Okay, we'll change that then to make you happy, for crying out loud.
Okay, so
But
this is really what when it comes to a nose. And I taste these for the folks. I taste them all at room temperature. That's how you are going to get the real
mhm.
wine, as well as it's a common known ploy by sales reps and people that come in here to taste wine is to chill them as much as they can because it will mask the flaws. And so I often make them leave a glass if it's too cold and let it warm up so I can taste it. And if you haven't experienced that, chill a glass of red wine and compare it to its warm counterpart, and you'll see how different wine can taste, chilled or unchilled. So this one, boy, the nose just jumps out of the glass, doesn't it?
I get something out of this nose that I've never gotten out of a rosé, and that's kind of a red apple.
Mm,
I mean, I really get red apple, and I just had a red apple last night, so it's fresh in my memory banks, if you will.
wow, I'll get that, but I'm still getting what you spoke about before, which is that stone fruit peach character.
Yeah,
Wow,
yeah.
and a little
Anyway,
kiwi you wrote down. But this is a full, this is a pretty full-bodied wine, and what I really love
yeah.
about wines coming from that part of the world, and particularly in the island, it's the elevation is pretty high, so you still get an influence of the marine layer from the Mediterranean, and you get a little savoriness,
Hmm.
which wines from the Ile Bouquet, of course, I got wines from Sardinia, wines from Sicily, are becoming some of my more favorite rosés and white wines because of that savory character that seems to come from its location around the Mediterranean Sea. So, and by the way, folks, you're welcome to chime in and have any questions. If you want to chat, you can chat with us. It's okay. We're not offended by that, of course. And the reason I chose this wine, which I wrote here, is why I chose this wine. That was pretty explicit, wasn't it?
Couldn't get any closer than that.
Because it's from the Ile. And I gave it a value score of 90. Enough people always say, well, that 98. The Spectator gave this wine a 62, and I'm like, no, we don't look at ratings like this. And I want to have this conversation with you briefly. We look at what other Ile de Bouteille wines of this vintage and what the value score for that wine from that place at that time. And we taste enough wines here, being 300 a month, that we get a huge smattering of wines from throughout the world to be able to make those comparisons over the years that we've done this. So this, as far as $15.99 rosés from Ile de Bouteille, this is way up there when it's quality ratio.
Oh yeah, it's fabulous. I mean, I think it's absolutely delicious. But we've had a few wines from Corsica, and they've been incredible, all of them.
So the question we just got on the chat is, what is the name of this wine? That is the name. It's called Ile de Bouteille, even though it's from the Ile de Bouteille. But Ile de Rosé is the name of the wine if you want the brand name. Ile de Bouteille is the island, and the terroir is schist, which is a type of soil. So it's got an embossed. Um,
Bottle.
we got a nice comment about my father's passing. I appreciate that. Thank you. It's got an embossed bottle, which costs extra money. Folks, there's one thing that's going on in the wine industry, particularly in the sustainable world. They're using thinner glass, and they're trying to, be more reduce the carbon footprint. So, some of these little special touches are kind of interesting to be occurring because they want to maintain the epicenter of the wine, the culture of the wine, and that's often done by using the embossed bottle of that region. So, boy, and the nose is just jumping out of the glass still.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and this is another wine that tasted better after it'd been open for a while too.
I'm getting a mineral character at the end there. That's really cool.
Yeah, some rocks.
Let's go to the Chateau Saint-Pierre.
Well,
so would you say that Provence is the
classic Provence bottle.
Would you say Provence is the epicenter of wine?
Of rosé?
Rosé.
Well, it's certainly one of them. I mean, I love the Rosé d'Anjou from Loire, made from Cabernet Franc, and some of them are made from Pinot Noir, and those to me are phenomenal. But these wines are also out of this world. I mean, Provence Rosé has been a favorite in at the Cannes Film Festival since Domaine Haute had the restaurant where all the stars go during the Cannes Film Festival to put a bottle of Domaine Haute on every single table. And when they did that, of course, they came back to America and said, "Hey, I want Domaine Haute," which is really a mediocre rosé, and it sold for like $40 a bottle 30 years ago.
It's very expensive.
All these wines blow Haute off the table, but they were the first.
And they bring them to me. They act like I'm cradling the firstborn child. We have a question. Some California rosés have a very strawberry aroma. Does the grape make it smell like a strawberry?
Yep. Well, when you think about it, I think I said this last time. We use so many fruit descriptives to talk about wine, which is only made from grapes. That's it. It's only made from grapes. But still, the reason why wine is so popular is because it can have such a plethora of different flavors and aromas of different fruits and different compounds. And it's kind of catch can. Yeah, strawberry is a huge flavor, especially in rosés.
And Pinot, if you were to pick a red wine that had the strawberry nose, and it was even Stephen Spurrier said in our podcast. By the way, folks, Wine Talks with Paul K is the podcast that we do twice a week. We have an amazing list of characters. We just got done with one in New York. We were in Soho, and I met with a woman named Alexandra Capralian, and her family's winery was literally taken by the soldiers when the Azerbaijanis took over Artsakh in Armenia, and they just stole the winery. So it's a fascinating story. So if you're a podcast, you listen to podcasts, it's Wine Talks with Paul K. And we just got done with, I drove down to Irvine this morning and had a podcast with Christina May, who owns Banfi Wines from Italy, and fascinating, passionate conversation about wine. So, but if you were to pick a wine that a red wine where strawberry seems the preeminent character, it's Pinot Noir. And then, of course, Pinot Noir-based rosés would have the same character. But that is what, it's interesting you brought that up, Ed, because I don't remember. Do you remember using terms that were fruit-related back in the 70s and 80s as part of it? Wasn't it a little more esoteric terms, not so granular in their description?
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, yeah, well, first of all, don't forget, there wasn't a lot of wine press. There weren't a lot of people writing about wine. I wrote articles in the Wine Spectator and Vintage Magazine and Wine Magazine, and we didn't use a lot of descriptives. We used some, but not as many as there are today. I mean, now everybody's stepping over each other trying to come up with a new word. to
Well,
describe a wine.
here's the part that makes me laugh, and is like, and I'll never forget my dad talking about the description of Sanford Pinot Noir back in the day. Somebody wrote that it tastes like Satsuma plum. Well, we should be using descriptors that people can relate to. And I don't even seen a Satsuma plum, let
Well,
alone
that's
know.
because Satsuma is a tangerine.
So,
That would be the biggest reason why you've never seen a Satsuma plum.
that could be the problem.
But I wouldn't be surprised if somebody used that term to describe it.
So here's the two wines. The colors are, yeah, the hue is the same, but there's a little bit different clarity. But wow, what a texture difference between these two wines.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. I mean, I
But
love this St. Pierre. To me, this is a classic rosé. It's just got everything going for it. It's really absolutely spectacular. And for that kind of money, you can't argue. And it's a classic blend of Cinsault and Grenache.
must be a typo. $15. The one thing about this wine is different from the other one. The finish is lingering.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's got the longest finish of all of them.
So this one was brought in for the folks. When you're looking at the back label of these things, the requirement by the government, particularly for imported wines, or only for imported wines, you must put an import statement on there, and that must be a legitimate company. It can't be a DBA of a DBA of a DBA. You have to be able to look up H. Mercer in this case and find a phone number or an address. He is a wonderful buyer, Michael Huddlestone. I think he moved out of L.A., but whenever he brings me wine, I know, and this is just for the listeners. If I tasted 75 wines on Tuesday, about 85% of them don't make the grade, mostly because they're too expensive. Some of them undrinkable. Many of them on Tuesday happen to be undrinkable, and then 15% of them, I think, if we worked with the price, we can do well for the members. But a guy like H. Mercer, and Jeff Wellborn as well, the first two, almost 100% of the wines they bring in are palatable and doable for the club because they're just really good at sourcing and importing. They have value and character on their palates to do this. So,
well, the first thing I told my students when I was teaching at UCLA for 10 years was the biggest and most important thing on the label is who put their name on it. Mm-hmm. Okay. And that's the most important thing. In the case of an imported wine, then it's going to be the importer and the person that put their name on it. Because most of the time you never heard of the person that put their name on it, the winery or the estate or the chateau, you never heard of them. But the guy who brings it in is the one that's made the decision. And some people make great decisions. And as you well know, some people don't.
Well, here's the thing that we're up against. And I was in Ralph's the other day looking at the wine section. And of course, everybody's got 19 crimes. And now there's 20 crimes because Martha Stewart has a Chardonnay, so she's a criminal. So she has.
Well, that makes sense. Yeah.
So I did a little selfie, and I'm kind of hoping that the market kicks me out. I want to videotape the wine manager come. Hey, what are you doing, sir? Yeah, you got out of here. You shouldn't do this. And what I was doing little quips on this 19 crimes. And one of the things I said during the video was the only crime is that they made this stuff. Because, we want wines to express where they're from and as best we can. If we're buying a wine that's from California, that's hard to pin down, but then we expect varietal character, not just sweetened up, stuff. And it's an important part of our industry, and what you and I should be doing is to show wines that develop the character of where they're from, if you can, and then if not, the grape that they're made from. And it's not just 14% alcohol and something fermented from grapes. And last night, 2 nights ago, I had a wine from Coho. It's a Cabernet. He's a good friend, Gary Lipp. His pedigree of winemaking is like off the charts. I mean, we hear this guy speak. He's so humble. It's like, wow, you worked where? And
he's humble and he's in the wine business?
Yeah.
That's an oxymoron.
I know. And but he worked for Joe Heights, he worked for Robert Mondavi, he worked for Andy Telesheff. I mean, his list of people that he worked with is like unbelievable. And this was one of the best Cabernets I've ever tasted from Napa. But it just said Napa Valley on it. And just for the listeners to understand sometimes what the labeling is like. And so I emailed him as soon as I tasted this wine. I said, this is one of the most expressive Napa cabs. It's more expressive from where it's from than most vineyard designated Napa cabs I've had from Napa. And he wrote back, he goes, it is from one vineyard. Just put Napa Valley on the label and not designated the vineyard, which is kind of a shame because it really was super. So that's our job, is to find wines that feel like where they're from, that taste like what they're from. And I think the first two so far have been great example. And you haven't even started these. The next two are the really expressive ones because of where they're from. So that's what we try to do. And let's get to the dancing crows.
I was not sure about this label. I don't see where dancing crows have anything to do with wine.
I don't know. We've done 3 of their wines over the last 5 or 7 years. They're really well made,
Mm-hmm.
and they're all Lake County.
Well, Lake County, as I think I put in one of the recent write-ups of the wines in the newsletter, is one of the best kept secrets in wine in California.
Oh, I think it's an incredible place, but I agree with you. The label, I don't know. So again, for the listeners and the watchers, the way the labeling of wine works, besides the legal requirements, which you see the government warnings, there's other things. You have to have the appellation where it's from. You have to have the bottling statement, like who made the wine. In this case, vinted and bottled by Dancing Crow Vineyards. You have to have a UPC code if you're going to sell it in a store. But the rest of it's kind of up in the air. You can kind of do what you want. There's certain limitations on nudity and stuff, but if you want it to be just black ink on white paper, you can do it. So it's a open palette to decide what you're going to put here. I'm not sure why they decided on this, but again, you can't judge a book by its cover, right?
Or a wine label.
There was an article written recently that I just read about, like, the effort to over package wine to cover up its quality. Have you ever sensed that?
Well, yeah, whenever I'm in the grocery store and I see somebody buying some wine, I usually, especially if they're a nice looking girl, I ask them what made them choose that wine. And I'd say 90% of the time they say price.
Yeah, it is price.
Yeah. I mean, and now one girl, when I was, a few weeks ago, said, well, I like Sauvignon Blanc. I said, well, you put 2 New Zealand Sauvignon Blancs. And she said, no, I didn't know they were from New Zealand.
Do you just start talking to people?
Yeah, I'm kind of a jovial kind of guy. I like to talk to people.
That's super.
Well, I just want to. I really am interested in what ordinary people makes them buy a wine. What is it? And a lot of times it's the label, and a lot of times, and most of the time, it's the price. And it's kind of interesting.
I might say, who wants to know?
I do, and that was pretty much all the case. I'll write a book about my experiences, and I'll let you have the first copy. Okay. And probably the only copy.
For the folks that are new to the show, Ed's book there's a book he's written called The Shortcuts on Wine. It's a great abridged version of might be a larger wine book, but it really gets to the point of stuff. It's called Shortcuts on Wine. Probably eBay, places like that. You can still find it. He revised it once. It's time for a revision. I was telling him the other day we should get.
Well, I did revise it on your website, as a matter of fact, and I had a rather tough time because there were a lot of revisions. A lot of things have changed. Mostly just the numbers, like how much it costs to grow grapes today versus then. I mean,
I had that conversation the other day. I was doing a tasting, a live tasting with a corporate group, and you always get the guys that know everything, and so they tasted a wine. It was a $28 Napa Cab. Okay. So if you know Napa Cabs, the $28 is a pretty cheap low price, right? It's pretty inexpensive.
Pretty cheap.
So during the conversation we're tasting, he goes, this tastes like it's grapes that came from all over the valley floor. And he's right. I mean, that was really good from a palate standpoint that he was able to recognize that. But the retort really should have been, look, if you understand that 3 years ago, a ton of Cabernet grapes from a decent area of Napa, let's say Rutherford or Coombsville or something, was $8,000 a ton, which for the listeners equates to a minimum of $80 a bottle worth of wine. You'd understand why you didn't get Coombsville Cabernet out of this $28 bottle of wine. I mean, how do you make money when you can't even think about charging less than $100 when you start buying grapes for Napa? How do you do it?
Well, I don't buy grapes from Napa or even wines from Napa, so I don't have that problem. But it is kind of crazy right now what's going on. I mean, it's more than crazy. But the fact is, if you look at a map of Napa, most of Napa is the valley floor. It is it is not a bunch of hills and mountains like it is in Sonoma. Sonoma is way more mountainous than Napa. Sure, they have Spring Mountain and the Mayacamas Mountain Range, but those are not the norm. Those are the exception. But most of the wines come from the valley floor. So guessing that this wine came from the valley floor when 70% of the wines come from the valley floor makes you a real genius.
That was brilliant, huh?
Thank you. Yes. Well, I thought it was too.
So this Dancing Crow, Lake County, we were talking about this, I think, last time, where Lake County is, we're seeing a lot more wines from Lake County. It's still sort of, isn't it part of Napa County, I think, still?
No, it was
north of Napa.
It wasn't, but for a time before the laws became rather strict, people in Napa were buying Lake County grapes and calling them Napa because it didn't have its own appellation. So they were kind of annexing it on purpose. And then finally, I don't know who said what to whom or whatever, and they said, okay, now we're going to be Lake County. Lake County is a relatively new appellation in California, but it's almost exactly the same as Napa. It's in the same latitude, it's the same altitude, the same soil, the same temperature. It's just half the price.
One of the differences is the marine influence is a little off because there's a little more mountains. So, folks, if you happen to be watching the fires in Napa, the second fire that started up on the eastern ridge, in the Mayacamas Mountains, it literally the soot would, if it was floating to the east, would have landed in Lake County. And this is a couple of wines we've done from the Dancing Crow Vineyards. And it's so fascinating to taste this wine and just go, oh, yeah, that's totally different than what we just tasted. And it's completely expressive of where it's from. And here's the culprit. One of the things is that this is 83% Syrah. So none of the wines we've tasted so far have Syrah in them, as well as this one did blend in some white wine, some Sauvignon Blanc. So that's going to give it a dimension that otherwise you wouldn't get. But, it's just so fascinating. This has got a little crisper character to it than the other two.
Well, I think that's because of the Sauvignon Blanc, and I think that was a good call, because Grenache ripens pretty easily, and the acid's lower as the ripening takes place. And so by adding some Sauvignon Blanc to it, you preserve that acidity, which is paramount in the balance of the wine.
One of the things too that I was trying to detect is where the Syrah might end and the Sauvignon Blanc.
Well, keep doing that, buddy, because I don't know what to tell you.
Sometimes you sense the pieces, or they kind of introduce themselves at different times during the taste. But in this case, I'm getting a completely melded, incredible experience through tasting this.
Absolutely, I mean, there's a point to which you can pick it apart a little too much, and and then you got to pick up the pieces. I mean,
to make the big money, Ed.
Yeah, right.
I had that conversation this morning with Christina May from Banffy, and I told her, I said, I've had a winemaker tell me, we don't make a lot of money doing this, but we taste amazing wines, go to amazing places, eat amazing food, and meet amazing people.
Well, you can't argue that. I mean, I've been doing this for almost 50 years, and the fact is, it's relatively true. It's what draws the flies to the flame. I mean, the beauty about being in the wine business is you meet people in the wine business, and they all have kind of the same outlook on things and the same taste. Mm-hmm. They're all obviously into wine. They're all obviously into food. Most of the times they're into art and music. So you meet somebody for the first time and you already have four things in common with them.
Right.
I mean, I really don't know too many people that aren't enjoying the arts along with food and wine. And so it's a different thing. It's a very different thing because most people that are in a certain field, that's their vocation, not their avocation. And people in the wine business is both,
right.
I mean, people that make windshield wipers don't have meetings about windshield wipers. They don't go to windshield wiper feelings and see what the differences are.
It's funny you brought that up. I just had a customer last week come in at the last minute. He spent a lot of money, and guess what he does?
He's a windshield wiper producer.
We got a question. He's just had a very interesting Pinot Gris rosé from the Cowichan Valley in Vancouver Island. Okay, so
well, that's from Chris, who's a very good friend of mine and a great guy, and he told me that we was going there and he's going to bring me back some wine, and I still haven't tasted it, Chris. I just want everybody to know I still have not tasted this wine that you have brought back for me from Victoria Island.
You get a Pinot Gris rosé.
You haven't gotten it yet.
Oh well, that's no excuse.
But Vancouver Island is very interesting because I did a podcast with Tilar Mazio, who's a two-time New York Times best-selling author, one for Veuve Clicquot, the famed book that exposes Madame Clicquot, Widow Clicquot's career, and a book called The Hotel at Place Vendôme, which is about the occupation of Paris and the Ritz Hotel during the war, which is a freaking fascinating story. And she was making sparkling wine on Vancouver Island, and COVID hit, and it put her out of business because there were no tourists. And Vancouver Island, since it was an island, they wouldn't let anybody on or off. And so there was no COVID on the island. And so she ended up having to dump, I don't know, it was like 300 bottles of this, what she calls raw sparkling wine. So they don't do anything. They don't disgorge or anything. You buy this wine and there's a bunch of stuff floating in it, and it's got no dosage, and it's just, I don't know, it didn't sound very good to me. But it was interesting during COVID. They didn't have it, at least at the time.
Well, most of those wineries, from what Chris was giving me the information on, don't have vineyards on the island. They buy their grapes from the Okanaga Valley, which is basically just across the border from the Columbia Valley in Washington.
I think this was, not to check into it.
It's the Okanagan Valley is just east of Vancouver.
Right. Well, I don't know about it. Yeah, but it's
the Oliver Valley is there also. Those are the two wine growing.
But it's a very, very different area from Vancouver and Seattle, which has got such a marine influence that it's very, very cool because it's protected from the cold winds of the south or east and cold winds of the west by the Cascade Mountains. And it's very much like Alsace. You know, Alsace is in this valley that should be cold, but it's not because it's protected by the mountains. And it's kind of an interesting situation there. On the map, it shouldn't be. They shouldn't make the wines that they do. You know, it's like the Burgenland in Austria and places like that.
How do we get a rosé out of a Pinot Gris? The Pinot Gris skin is a little darker. It's just a skin contact.
Yeah, skin contact. Yeah, you give a Pinot Gris some skin contact, you're going to get a pinkish and a greenish tinge out of it.
Well,
it was very good. I wish you'd been there, Ed.
No, you don't.
Wait a second. This is Chris and my conversation.
So, here's speaking of skin contact, this Navarra, 100% Grenache. But look at that color, man. That is.
Yeah, that's the darkest of the bunch, you know.
But it's a wild color, just the tone of it. And it's 100% Grenache, and it's also from Navarra, which is way up by the base of the Pyrenees. So, I mean, the base of the Pyrenees. So, it's a colder area. I remember tasting this the first time and going, what? I'm like, what? And this is 14% alcohol.
Well, you know, Grenache is the main component in a lot of the rosés from the Rhone, because in southern Rhone, which makes probably 90% of the rosés come from the southern Rhone, and Grenache is the principal grape down there. But it's a very different wine when it's made in Spain. And I think that's probably because Grenache is a Spanish varietal. It was not first cultivated in France, even though the French would like to think so, because they created everything if you ask them properly or even improperly. But the fact is, it's a Spanish grape, and yet it is the most important component in Chardonnay de Pape, which is one of the most famous French wines there is.
Well, this is certainly the color. If we're looking for the classic, tasting through and the four S's and.
Mm-hmm.
The color, the palate is reinforcing this wonderful weight you see in the color of the wine.
It is definitely the biggest and most robust of the rosés. I mean, you could have this with red meat, and
that's a good point. We should talk about earlier. Some of these rosés that will do well with across certain food groups, and this is a classic idea of putting something with this kind of backbone behind a steak or a beef bourguignon or something like that.
Well, my favorite day to drink rosés is Tuesday, and followed closely behind by Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and then of course. Sorry, I didn't mean to make you choke on your wine, but
Anything that ends with the word day.
if it ends in the word day, it's a good day to drink. I only drink alone or with company. I'm very selective.
But I keep wanting to smell this and just see what's next, because there's enough skin contact to give it really some depth and some dimension.
Well, it really does have the depth, and the depth obviously comes from the skin contact, and the skin contact is what made it darkest of all of the rosés. I mean, hell, this could almost be a Pinot Noir,
Right. You're right. The finish and the acid, the backbone is got it. It's got the structure for that, for that kind of wine. Almost a light Pinot Noir, or
that's right. Because Pinot Noir has a very thin skin, and if you don't manipulate it, you can actually make a fabulous tasting wine with that color in it, and it's a Pinot Noir.
Yep.
So there you have it.
Really fun. Any questions from the folks out there? We're just coming on time here at 4:45. All these available, of course. Wine of the Month Club, $15.99 for the last one. Most rosés that you see in the market, $22, $24, $25 is kind of the going range. Domaine Haute, I think, probably $35 for a bottle. Which
Domaine Haute was $40 30 years ago. What do you think it costs now?
Somebody gave me a Magnum of it, 3 liter, but I think we have the club is what's interesting is the Rosé Club is growing, and we have a lot of customers on the West Coast, and they're starting to come to rosé and go, yeah, I can have this with this, and I can taste that with that, and if I'm at a party, I don't feel like something heavy like a red, I can have a rosé and still get still sense complexity and still sense a sense of place or a sense of time, and that's what's wonderful about these wines, and I think we demonstrated that each one of these is rather expressive of where it's from and what it's trying to be.
Well, almost every major wine shop that I've been into in the last year has got not just a few rosés, but an entire section and floor stacks of them. So obviously they're putting their money behind them because they're selling. If they weren't selling, they wouldn't be, promoting them as well.
I had an interesting experience in New York. We were in New York for a wedding, and I went to a wine shop because we were going to stay at home that night in the hotel and drink some wine. And the wine you're talking about wine shops. The wine shops in New York have a completely different list of wines than we have in California. The importers, don't always come to California, and vice versa. So I'm in the wine shop, and I don't recognize a ton of stuff except for the mainstream stuff, and I want something different. So I felt like a Valpolicella Ripasso, which I think is always great value.
I love it. Love it.
List. I'm going, okay, there's good vintage. And a Bordeaux, which I fortunately got onto my database of tastings, and I had tasted previous vintages of this Bordeaux, and I really liked it, so I bought that Bordeaux. But I'm talking about the $20 range, not unlike what your experience with customers are when you go to the market and ask them, like, who's this? How much are you paying for your wine, kind of guy. But but I was so disappointed, even with all the tasting experience. I don't know what that bottle is going to taste like until I pour it in a glass, even though I know enough. And I dumped it. It was really quite sad. I had to dump it. Now, I think personally that the wine was just not stored properly in this store. It was the second floor of the store. There didn't seem like to be a lot of air conditioning in there, even though it was not an old vintage, but it just, how a wine tastes when it's just going bad because of bad storage versus just a bad wine is.
Yeah, but it takes a lot for a wine to go bad because of storage, unless it's really intense. Wines are, especially wines of pedigree, have a lot more going for them than people give them credit for.
They have a lot of resilience, but this one just, I don't know, whatever. Anyway, folks, thanks for checking it out this time around. Hope to see you in 2 weeks. What are we doing in 2 weeks?
Wine. We're tasting wine in 2 weeks.
Yeah, but I forgot the group.
I don't remember the group either.
You'll see an email for you folks, and hope you enjoyed the show, and we'll be back. See you soon.